Hey guys, it's Chris. From a mysterious humanoid alien skull to the ancient skeletons of caveman cannibals, here are 10 of the most bizarre skulls and skeletons ever found. Number 10. Mexican Cave Skull. In a Mexican cave, divers have discovered the horribly disfigured skeleton of a woman from nearly 10,000 years ago. The skull and bones of this mysterious woman were found on the Yucatan Peninsula and were dated to be about 9,900 years old, making her one of the oldest known inhabitants of what is currently Mexico. To make this discovery even more bizarre, the woman's skull had 3 injuries. Something had hit that woman very hard and broken her skull. Her skull also had some very strange deformations that researchers believe could be linked to a bacterial relative of syphilis. And if so, this would be the earliest known beginnings of that disease. According to a researcher and professor from the Institute of Earth Sciences at Heidelberg University in Germany, the woman had a very hard time in life and a very miserable end to her life. Because of the traumas and deformations on her skull, researchers believe she was likely expelled from whatever group she belonged to, then either left in the cave to die on her own or was murdered in a rather brutal fashion. The skull of the woman was found in 2016 by cave explorers, very close to the popular tourist town of Tulum. Like many of the other ancient skulls found in the same area, this woman had a very different structure to that of other early humans living in Mexico near the end of the last ice age. First, her skull was elongated with a slightly longer and narrower brain case. This means she had a narrower face than the other ancient people who lived in Mexico. In addition, she had strange cavities in her teeth that researchers believed means that she had a diet high in sugar. Number 9. Caveman Cannibals. There's nothing quite worse than cannibals, and we can probably all agree on that. However, a recent discovery is suggesting that our ancient ancestors may very well have been a bunch of savage cannibals. The skeletal remains of Neanderthals found in Belgium have given scientists ghoulish evidence that not only did our ancient caveman ancestors feed on horses and reindeer, but also on one another. The human bones discovered belong to a group of people from about 40,000 years ago, and they show clear and irrefutable evidence that cannibalism was practiced in Belgium and likely all over Europe from the south of Spain all the way to the east. These were Neanderthals who were on the cusp of being replaced by Homo sapiens. While scientists have for a long time believed that primitive cavemen were brought to extinction by smarter and more modern humans, these new discoveries suggest that they were actually more sophisticated than we thought. Not only do scientists now believe that Neanderthals had burial rituals, they also believe that the Neanderthals ate people who died. The evidence is in the bones. The skeletons found showed traces of cutting, which researchers believed indicates that the flesh was removed to be eaten. The Neanderthals even broke the bones of their dead friends in the exact same way that they broke the bones of reindeer. This was so that they could extract and drink the marrow. It gets a lot more ghoulish than this, but the basic takeaway here is that far away in our past, we didn't bury our dead without first eating them at least a little bit. Number 8. Irish Bog Bodies. Out of all the skeletons found in the last few years, the Irish Bog Bodies are definitely some of the most interesting. The bog bodies are special because they were preserved exceptionally well due to where they were buried. The cold and oxygen-free conditions beneath peat bogs prevented decay and caused the mummification of human flesh. Basically, the people who were buried in the Irish bogs became natural mummies. The most famous of all the bog bodies in Ireland is definitely the old Crogan man, who was found inside of the bog beneath Crogan Hill. Radiocarbon dating placed his death somewhere between 362 BC and 175 BC. Even more startling than his age was that he would have measured 6 feet 6 inches in height when alive, making him kind of a giant. Scientists were even able to analyze the contents of his stomach to find his last meal, which consisted of cereal and milk. Who would have thought that this guy was just sitting there eating a bowl of mini-wheats thousands of years ago before he was then buried in a bog? Less innocent than the guy eating cereal before his death is the manner in which he died. Researchers believed that many of the bodies found in the Irish bogs were actually ritually tortured and murdered, and this was why they were thrown into such a foul place rather than being properly buried. The old Crogan man had holes sliced in his upper arms and had been restrained with a rope. And get ready for the really nasty stuff here. Researchers say that he was stabbed, he had his nipples cut off, and then he was cut clean in half before being left to mummify in the bog. And it gets even worse, but I'm clearly not going to get into that here. You can see many of these bog bodies at the Natural Museum of Ireland or at London's British Museum. Number 7. Mysterious humanoid skull. The first skull on the list for today is a strange humanoid fossil allegedly discovered in Africa in 2010. This skull has by no means been reported in any mainstream media, and it's entirely possible it's not real or that it's being covered up by some kind of organization. But so far as the story goes, the skull of this alien creature is at least 12 million years old. That means it's significantly older than any skull of any other humanoid creature found on the planet, seeing as the oldest humanoid skull ever discovered was in Ethiopia and was found to be 3.2 million years old. Even though there are some reports that say this mysterious alien skull has been investigated at many popular universities, there's no concrete data of that happening. And nobody's sure where the skull is now, what kind of creature it might have belonged to, or what planet it came from if it is indeed a fossil of alien life. Number 6. Child warrior's elongated skull. In Crimea, archaeologists have found an alien boy with a strangely elongated skull inside of a tomb. While at first glance this child may look like some kind of freak sent to us from a distant planet in the stars, new research says he was actually an ancient warrior. According to Russian archaeologists, the boy's head had been artificially lengthened as part of a grooming process for young Sarmatian fighters nearly 2,000 years ago. The skull was initially found at a burial site near a very expensive bridge currently under construction. At first, it was assumed to be the grave of an alien. Of course, realistic science says that the warrior boy was definitely not extraterrestrial. He was only about 18 months old when he died, and so he never got to grow up to be a true warrior with his elongated skull. This kind of deliberate deformation was done in several different parts of the ancient world, as when children are first born, their bones are super soft and can be manipulated into strange shapes by tying wooden planks to either side of the skull. Warriors with these kinds of features were seen as more aggressive and deadlier in combat. Number 5. Skeletons at Cheesman Park. The last place anyone expects to find a trove of skeletons is at their local park. However, just a few years ago, irrigation workers at Denver's Cheesman Park unearthed an old cemetery full of preserved skeletons. The skeletons were taken to the coroner's office, where they were then dated to be older than a century. Rather than putting the skeletons back into the park for the kids to play with, they were reinterred at the nearby cemetery, but unfortunately their identities were lost to history. The reason for this is that the Cheesman Cemetery had had a lot of criminals buried in it without any headstones or any records. According to the spokeswoman for the Denver Parks and Recreation Department, there's nowhere to look to find out who the mysterious bones belong to. Today, Cheesman Park is a scenic place to hang out near downtown. But until the mid-1800s, the park was part of a giant cemetery. The first person ever buried in the cemetery was a man named John Stofel, who was hanged for a crime of killing his brother-in-law. But by 1890, the cemetery wasn't really used anymore. It had turned into an ugly patch in the neighborhood, so the city relocated most of the bodies and then turned the graveyard into a city park. As you already know from this entire story, they clearly missed a few of the bones. Number 4. The rooted skeleton. Finding skeletons in a city park is definitely strange, but this next story tops it. In Ireland, the skeletal remains of a young man were found tangled within the roots of a tree after it blew over during a windstorm. Archaeologists were hired by the National Monument Service in Ireland to excavate and study the remains. What they found was that the man buried inside the tree had come to a very violent end about 1,000 years ago. This is incredible considering the tree was only 215 years old when the Irish winds pushed it over. Radiocarbon dating puts the man at being alive in the medieval period, probably from sometime between 1030 and 1200. At the time of death, the guy would have been somewhere around 20 years old. Researchers also discovered knife injuries to his hands and ribs. The archaeologists told CNN News that the guy had probably died from a local conflict and then received a proper Christian burial. However, the burial wouldn't last forever, as a powerful tree decided to grow its roots through the man's body, and the rest of the story you already know. Number 3. Mysterious human relative. A new excavation has revealed a mysterious human relative. A skull has been found after an incredible excavation in South Africa that lasted for 20 years. After quite a bit of work, researchers have finally cleaned and documented an almost complete skeleton of an ancient human relative that they have nicknamed Littlefoot. And as you can see by the skull on this strange creature, it looks more monkey than man. And that's because before its discovery, it was a completely unknown species. There have since been 4 studies posted in various journals outlining what the researchers uncovered about the anatomy of this new human-like being. According to Live Science, they believed that Littlefoot would have walked upright on both feet, but that she was very close to what we popularly think of as the missing link. This may seem boring to some of you, but it's actually one of the most incredible archaeological discoveries related to humankind that has ever occurred. Littlefoot is in fact a member of the same genus as Lucy, the 3.2 million year old skeleton found in Ethiopia. That means that Littlefoot was an ape-like hominin, a kind of middle ground between ancient apes and modern humans. She was in essence a bipedal primate with a brain much larger than an ordinary chimp. Oh yeah, and Littlefoot is 3.67 million years old. Talk about an ancient ancestor. Number 2. Peruvian alien skull. Another elongated skull was found in Peru, but unlike the infant skull we talked about earlier, this one could definitely prove the existence of aliens. According to a report from the Daily Mail, this strange skull was discovered to be nearly as large as its body, and it's been baffling anthropologists ever since its discovery over a decade ago. It was one of 2 skulls found inside an ancient city in the south of Peru. But what really stands out with this skull, really differentiating it from skulls that have been deformed through the use of wooden planks, are the eye cavities. The eye sockets are way larger than anything ever seen on any human remains ever. Just looking at the eye sockets on this skull and you know it belonged to some sort of alien freak. The eye sockets on the skull look to be about the size of a standard human fist. Nobody's eyes could be that big, not even the largest man who's ever walked the earth. Some other strange traits of the skull include the soft spot at the top, which is usually only found in children when they're very young. But in direct contrast to this, the skull also has 2 large molars that are generally only found in older humans. All we know so far is that the skull likely doesn't belong to a human being. According to anthropologists from Spain and Russia, further studies need to be done to determine exactly what species the skull belongs to. But considering this story is from 2011 and there has yet to be any follow-up, it's highly possible that the story and the research have been squashed by the men in black. Number 1. The Screaming Mummy. The Screaming Mummy is one of the weirdest skeletons ever found in Egypt. She was discovered first in the year 1881, and as her name suggests, she appears to have died screaming. However, new research is saying that the Screaming Mummy did not really scream at the time of her death. It's important to note that she was likely a princess about 3,000 years ago, and that this new evidence is saying that she died of a sudden heart attack. So what's with the screaming face then? You know, it's actually not that exciting. A famous Egyptologist and professor at Cairo University re-examined the Screaming Mummy and determined that after she died, her head probably tilted to the side, her jaw dropped, and her face was frozen in that weird position thanks to rigor mortis. The embalmers then would have mummified her very quickly before her body could start to rot. And so she got fixed in the position where she appears to have been screaming in death. It could have been a lazy job by the embalmers who mummified her, but the truth is that this was over 3,000 years ago, so we'll probably never know the truth for sure. The only other possibility is that she was actually mummified while still alive and screaming, but hopefully that wasn't the case, because that's terrifying. Out of all of these crazy skulls and skeletons, which one do you think is the strangest? Let me know your thoughts in the comments, and thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that subscribe button, and I'll see you again soon for another awesome video.